and the settlements are growing.
Are those Palestinian settlements are they outweighing the Israeli settlements? Because as far as I'm concerned, they're both making more settlements. But who's making more?
Can we just hold on a second? I want to do this in order. I promise I'm going to get to you after. I want her to because her hand was raised. I'm trying my best. I'm sorry.
Now that we have those maps up, do you believe that if Israel and Palestine would again get that offer, that UN plan from 47, that they would accept that either party? Do you think either party would accept that plan, and which one do you think would or wouldn't?
The 47 plan?
Yes.
Oh, well, that would be like a miracle for Palestinians, right? But that's not even what they're asking for anymore. They're asking for the third one. That's all they're asking for the 67 lines, right? But the Israeli government, the Israeli population, the way they voted suggests they're not ready to make that compromise, right?
Even though the number of Palestinians is still larger than the number of Israelis, is that right?
No. Inside, it depends on who we're counting, but inside the territories, which is, if you're looking at the third slide, the green areas, so Gaza and the West Bank, we're talking about 3 million, about 1.5 million in each place, right? And then about 1 million Palestinians, citizens of Israel. So what's that? 4 million. And then there are about 5 million Jewish Israelis. So it's slightly more Israelis in that whole area, right? But there are another, like 3 or 4 million Palestinians in the diaspora. So the question of return is something I didn't touch on at all, but the question of the return of refugees, right? I think I said there were three outstanding issues: Jerusalem, settlements, and refugees. So what do you do with all the refugees in Lebanon and East Bank of Jordan, and do they have a right to return? So those are issues Israel says, no way. There's probably some middle ground, like recognizing the right and therefore paying compensation, right? Not everybody would come. There's ways to negotiate that, but it is one of the major obstacles, right? To the question. I don't know if I answered your question. Oh, you're
okay.
Go ahead.
Basically, I didn't see her hand before. Her, then him. Actually, wow. I'm gonna try to do as best as possible. Her, okay. And then Pete, and then him, and then we're gonna go in the back.
No more favored Israel and because the critical violations of Palestinian human rights. Do you think that he will do something about the situation? Because I don't think so.
I don't feel myself an expert on Obama, and so I have my skepticism, as I share that skepticism with you, but not as a not because of him in particular, but because of the sort of critical mass in politics of the United States, that so much has to change. I think that in terms of American politics, as long as we have an active war going on in the Middle East, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, I think there's going to be very little pressure on Israel to change anything, and quite the opposite. As long as the United States has a hot war going on in the Middle East, I think that has given, over the last few years, a great deal of sort of political cover to Israel to go ahead and sort of assault Gaza in the way that happened. That really wouldn't have existed if there weren't, 100,000 troops, American troops, nearby. I think in America it gives a certain kind of political cover, and it makes Americans more sympathetic with Israel because Hamas is linked to Al Qaeda, which is they're not. I mean, that's not a link. They're very different movements.
Absent of an effective apparatus to enforce the rule of law in Palestine or from the Palestinians, how can Israel be expected to have peaceful relations with the Palestinians? Because that is a key component of any form of peace. If if criminals, you can call them criminals, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, if criminals continue to bombard civilians with homemade rockets, and yet Israel's citizens are not bombarding Palestinian citizens.
Well, they are.
With homemade rockets?
No, with very expensive rockets bought from the United States.
Now, what I'm saying is, obviously, normal civilians, not military members, are in Israel, are not retaliating or starting their own wars, whereas it appears as if me as a general citizen of the United States started shooting rockets over at Canada. You would generally expect Canada to start shooting military hardware back here at the United States. With a breakdown of the rule of law in that particular area, how can anyone be expected to say, okay, yeah, we'll be peaceful now?
I think there's like sort of two questions in some ways. But one is, about like which way, the idea that Israel is not bombarding Palestinians and that the Palestinians are bombarding Israel is incorrect. The assaults, and I mean assaults, I mean like, Apache helicopters, blowing people up, that kind of stuff. That was like, those are called police actions, right? I mean, you hear about them in the American media. If you're there, they're horrific attacks that blow out store windows. And then I've been in Israel when bombs went off, and I've been in the West Bank when attacks happen. The level of destruction is incomparable between the West Bank and Gaza and Israel. Israelis, I am totally sympathetic with my Israeli colleagues and friends who worry about going to the mall and getting blown up. I've been in those malls, I totally sympathize with that. But that's like, they're going to work. They're going around. They're going to the mall. In the West Bank, everything is militarized. The level of destruction is so much higher. So to paint it the other way, as the American media does, is a distortion. Let me talk about the rule of law, though, for a second, okay?
I'll respond to you.
Okay, the rule of law. There are, the Prime Minister, the President of Israel, convicted, right, of crimes. There are all kinds of history. There's all kinds of stuff in Israel I can point to that we see their leadership as criminal. And there's all kinds of stuff in the PLO that I could point to that sees their side as criminal. I don't think either side has a clean slate. But in terms of enforcing the rule of law, the best thing that happened in the territories in the 1990s was the arrival of the Palestinian Authority. It began that process of creating rule of law, and their hands were completely tied by the actions of the Israeli military that really pulled the rug out of Palestinian police, right? And made it impossible for them to enforce any kind of law. So they demanded that the Palestinian police catch Hamas, and then they blew up Palestinian police headquarters, right? And I'm not just talking about once, I'm talking about this is the pattern. So how do you ask the police to go arrest people when they can't even meet safely in a location to plan their activities, right? So I don't know if you want to.
It appears that I'm a veteran of my Iraq. I've been in Iraq for a year, and I know a lot from visually, actually experiencing what the breakdown of the rule of law, what happens to the general public.
Right.
And yes, there are attacks on the military, but there's also a large amount of attacks on civilians and just civilians for the sole purpose of just inflicting casualties on the other side. And I'm wondering, and that was the main premise of my.
We don't have that situation. We don't have Palestinians fighting Palestinians. There have been some skirmishes, Hamas and Fatah, they were thrown out, but the violence was pretty minimal, right? A couple people were killed, but only a couple. And for the most part, compared to Iraq, it's nothing like that. There's a political difference, but these are not sectarian differences.
I'm sorry, I got to intervene. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Another question. I mean, my questions could probably go on all day, so I'm going to try to keep it to a minimum. So clearly there's some sort of a Palestinian government with Palestinian territories. Is it feasible for them to form a state with the land that they have? Because when Israel was formed, they were just happy to take whatever they got, whether majority of it was just pure desert. But because they're scattered on the map, I mean, is it feasible for them to form a nation with what they have or not?
The devil's in the details, right? What do we mean when we say a sovereign state, right? What do we mean?